Welcome to Grieving the Invisible Resilience, a Colonial Construct of Erasure by Angelique Yaya Arroyo. So I wanted to start out as this kind of presentation, mixed media, art, poetry, all the things come into place. I began this inquiry with specific questions around how do I presence something that I've witnessed in my work and my years as an anti-racism and social justice facilitator and space holder. One of the things that has struck me over time is the idea that we, as communities of color, or communities with a lot of intersectionality of identities, have been grieving and mourning what can be perceived as invisible things. And with trauma being such a big part of the conversation these days, in terms of healing or wellness, I've discovered in my work over the years that what we have called resilience, I've come to term faux resilience, because what the metric of resilience is that we have, we're able to keep jobs, we're able to have families, we're able to do things or function, at least based on the construct's creation. We function as a normal, if you will, quote unquote, normal human being or normal person, with permission given to live in the society as long as we behave well. And for me, I've grappled with this conversation since the inception of it for myself, and also having others give me direction or offer up direction around it, because I think what happens in a lot of this conversation is the idea that we want to shape it into what we want it to look like because of the personal impact that it may have on us. So as we move through this visual compilation or story or narrative, I've intentionally used very striking images. Most of the images are from Unsplash, and then some are personal images. You'll find 5 pieces of mixed media art, and each of them is actually layered. So underneath the surface, there's watercolors with every piece has at the center golden color. And then on top of that is the black. And then on top of that are images of our physiology. One of them is the brain. One of them is the stomach area, which would be kind of like the solar plexus chakra, the center. One of them is the voice, and it has a mask to speak to the ways that we conceal ourselves in our pain and challenges. Another is the puzzle pieces, which has the intestinal system. And one of them is the actual anatomical heart. And you'll notice that they're full of rubber bands, each piece, because trauma, when we're talking about resilience and we're talking about the ways resilience looks, the example used is a rubber band. And the rubber band, according to the ideology or the theory rather of this resilience thing, the rubber band is supposed to stretch out and then snap back to its original place. And this is what we call resilience. It hasn't been my experience even for myself in my personal experience, extremely irritated with the idea of the rubber band, because some of us don't have a place of origin to snap back to, because life has always been full of challenges and pain and sorrow and trauma. And when I mean trauma, I don't just mean event trauma. I mean ongoing trauma. And so I've cut up in one of the pieces, the rubber bands are cut up. It's my kind of declaration that it's bullshit, that some of our rubber bands have broken and there's no way to put that back together. And I don't know that that particular model serves our highest, wellness, just because for some folks in our communities, often a byproduct of, epigenetics and trauma moving through our DNA, in addition to the real-time experiences, there is no normal. And if you come from a background that has a lot of violence and a lot of pain and a lot of trauma, as I said before, and ongoing trauma, which would be like racism, sexism, and fill in the blank, then there is no snapping back. And so you're constantly in the place of creating something entirely different. Creating a different anchor, or allowing yourself to have things as different anchors. So the idea of resilience kind of gets deconstructed. And I'm often asked, well, what do we use instead of resilience? And I mean, there's a million ways we can talk about our capacity or lack thereof, and also limitations. Our hope is not only found, which you'll see in some of the pieces, is like pieces of gold foil around the organs or around, particular pieces. And that's because we are not golden or gold because we have survived. We were born and forged from the place of fire. We were born and forged from a place of pain. And that doesn't go away in the way that society would like it, or the social construct. And so part of some of the struggle with putting this together for myself as a culmination of things has a lot to do not with the density or intensity of the subject matter, but rather how I wanted to give this shape, and even finding language to express the ways that this shows up for me. And that's been a journey in itself, right? So what you'll see as we move through the images is that there'll be the piece of mixed media that I created, and then there'll be other images to kind of mirror what that space looks like and feels like. What happens when the mind becomes so fragmented or fractured, and we have mental illness, right? And so there's no normal in that, and the baseline continues to change. What happens when trauma is so severe and ongoing and repetitive that our minds, our psyches, our human spirit is overweighed and overwhelmed with the pain. And so this ties into the aspect of mourning and grief, because it's almost invisible, because it looks like everything's normal. It looks like we're functioning. It looks like we can keep the job. It looks like this, that, and the other. It looks like you have the most stylish thing, or you appear to the social construct as someone who had a bad time, and all of a sudden, they're looking great. They can be a regular citizen and fit in. And that's the last thing that's happening. Our bodies and our psyches and our collective psyche is struggling because we are not even creating enough space for mourning rituals or grieving rituals. And also acknowledging that some grief is complex and complicated. And so there's no over time you'll get over it, or over time you'll move through it. No, over time, you'll still be working on re-anchoring yourself and figuring out what is needing the attention to offer up a ritual of grief, a ritual of mourning, so that it's actually given a space in our lives rather than trying to hide it or focusing on just the positive. And the way that shows up a lot in community, as it's been my observation, is that people who are incredibly uncomfortable with the pain that's within and the challenges within, and they're constantly fighting to show up in a certain way, are often the people that most really wish that folks wouldn't, be the Debbie Downers, or name or bring into the presence the idea that that pain sometimes won't go away, that grief sometimes won't go away. Sometimes it's integrated and it has an expression, and sometimes it doesn't because it's an ongoing thing. And what do we do in a collective society that we're continuing to experience ongoing trauma through racism, sexism, ableism, all the isms? There's no recovery time. There's no processing time because you have to wake up the next day and engage in the same matrix, in the same cycle. And because of that, it becomes really important to take the time to name the fact that resilience is actually another tool, another construct that has created almost like, who's going to be the, if you will, the shiniest resilient person, who's going to get over it and not make it, not make too much noise so that it's not disrupting everybody else's idea of what it's supposed to look like to be a community. This is very specific to BIPOC. It's very specific to communities impacted by marginalization. Again, my work has primarily been with anti-racism work, sexual assault survivors, domestic violence. So a little bit of everything. And as a poet and as a creator and a teacher, then for me, it's like all these things are intersecting. So in the process of this video, I'm going to share some pieces that I wrote. I'm not done yet, and I feel like this is one of those things that are never done, and has a lot of pieces. But for now, this is so far what's emerged and what I would like to share. So, I will share one of the pieces that I wrote for the image that has the heart. Is it resilient if my heart breaks over and over for me and my people? My aorta is clogged from years of invisible grief. No names for the ways and the pain. No funeral, no eulogy, no plaque. Remembering the places where my heart broke. My heart a no-name zone. A mitral valve too weak to calibrate. My irregular heartbeat doesn't just skip a beat. It pauses every time I see the pain of my people. Fragmented memories of how the beach sings, of hearing mi amor, como estás, and the way salsa lights us up. Is it resilient if my heart breaks over my people? What are these American ways that say give back to the community? Where the fuck did you go? Why is it that the better takes us away from each other? This is how the atrial systole gets jacked up. Your energy is stuck, and that electrical current backfiring has you backed up. The heart controls its own rhythm, but its rate is controlled by the central nervous system. This thing's getting on your nerves is rooted in how broken your heart actually is. The food feeds the heart a constant load, calcifying where you have not been heard, weakening their heart. They soon will bow down and be docile. Fucked up relationship of dominion and the hunger to dominate, reducing us to animals fighting for the last piece. Doing it in style and call it good marketing. The grief stores along the genetic memory of days long gone. No name for the way the heart grieves happy hour, a poor substitute for the relief from the guilt. Every time you are asked to get your people under control, don't they know what is proper, what is appropriate? Is it resilient even though I carry my heart in pieces, barely held together by a thread that keeps breaking on me? My blood cries and screams, all the memory drained out of me. Somehow, now it is my responsibility to take care of the wound you continually inflict, telling me how shiny I am, how well I speak, when did I learn English, often asked of me. The pain in my chest that runs through my arms and neck. My heart is holding all the ways I've been lost. fighting to resist what others call the great American culture, the one that lulls you to sleep with propaganda that teaches you to betray your own heart because that means success. And isn't it success what you want? You must pay a blood price. You must also hide your heart. Yes, your heart beats and it is alive. Follow it. Name when it is broken, when it is not okay, when it hurts so bad. Listen deeply until it feels heard. Heartbreak needs a circle of people who will drum in all the worlds. Who will remind you that your heart doesn't have to hold it all in. Fuck your resilience that demands that we drink our tears and rise from our fears with a smile and a song. Have the decency to know when a eulogy and a funeral is needed for all things lost, trying to be resilient. The next one is it resilient if you live in a box? This particular piece, it looks like the map of Puerto Rico, and it has like the kidney system. And I have fabric yarn going around and like an X in the middle. This was inspired by my grandmother, who a very, saucy, amazing Boricua who lived in the same apartment building for as old as I am. That's 44 years. And so I want to name that this piece came from that. The space feels tight, but I make it look good. I have been living here so long, my lungs can't expand. I don't know if I want them to. In the space that is so safe, I walk the park path every day. I look like everything is okay. Fashionable when you see me, my circle of friends is a circle of one. I don't like new people. I say hi and I say bye. I've lived here most of my life. The impending doom on my nerves like a weighted blanket overwhelm me. Is this the day that I'll hear the knock on my door, the landlord raising the rent, eviction and unconscious threat? Is it resilience? Is it resilience when I am a prisoner in a box? I look smooth on the surface, underneath I am in knots. You celebrate my victories according to your lies. My stock in Tums has grown, antacids the candies of adults. My purchases make Wall Street go round. I don't know how to give it words, but I live afraid, and you'll never know. I'll never tell you what I fear, but I live with that myself. It is scheduled for the 13th. My rent is subsidized. They'll ask questions like the FBI. The subsidy cost me my dignity because I am terrified of being in the streets. So they ask invasive questions. I live earning and proving I am a worthy investment. Is it resilience if I live in a box? I watch through the windows, sit there every day at 12, the world flying by, kids screaming, mothers saying you'll survive. There is a whole world at my window. Ever wonder why some people window watch? It is the safest view of the jungle, one where I can't be touched. My lungs live in a state of contraction. I have gasped too many times to count. Alveoli are clogged, nothing to keep the bacteria out. The doctor recommends an asthma pump, but can't get rid of the fear of not being enough. I move the furniture. This is the way I stir up change. The new curtains are delicately put on the same old frames. The chinero has a can of coffee. I've been saving pennies, nickels, and dimes. Who knows, one day I'll take a cruise ship, visit different ports one day when the time is right. Is it still resilient if I live in a box? What kind of society calls this living? You are a guest that can easily be displaced, easily rendered nowhere, told it is your fault in the land of opportunity. Everyone can make it. As in, have a house that is never fully yours, a job, you have to climb a shiny star at the top. Then comes the drop, one focus, no nets of security. How is that living? My world so tightly curated, success looks like paying someone else's bills. Survival of the fittest, the rest can just die. Fuck your resilience. I live in a box. I live in a prison where I imagine I am safe, secretly afraid of the knock. And I feel like for me, when I'm looking at this and kind of my drive to get my PhD in psychology has so much to do with these constructs that we're slowly falling apart and slowly enacting, the trauma responses, but they've been so normalized that when somebody's fawning, we think it's great. We think they know tact. We think they know like how to be silent and when to speak. We'll never realize that they're wearing a mask and that they actually can't hear themselves think. And so for me, it's like, how do we change this narrative? How do we talk about when somebody fights, we again, enacting these responses when they take flight, when they're seeking to be relieved. Have you ever had to live with so much pressure that it makes your knees buckle? And I feel like if we're going to talk about healing, and if we're going to talk about the way ritual can be part of that, we have to talk about the things that may be unforgivable, unforgettable, unpardonable, the things that don't just function the way we want it to function. And so this is dedicated to my mother, Vilma Aide Rosado Torres, and my grandmother, Geraldine Aide Torres, because what I watched was these strong women behind closed doors where nobody knows constantly fall apart or constantly struggle to normalize what they were experiencing every day that didn't go away. In all the circles that I've sat in and that I've been part of facilitating, I cannot tell you how many times I've had to sit with my own community, and specifically with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, which is a horrid generality, far too general. Latinx and other folks of color, like we're so many, we're not a monolith. And to recognize the ways in which we're still carrying pain, even when we have, where we have what society calls success. So a lot of these lessons not only came from circle spaces, but they also came from my own experience and my family's experience. And one of the things that I refuse to contribute to anymore is trying to qualify with data our human experience. I believe us. And there's a part of the colonial conditioning that continues to shape education, information, our human psyche, our processing, by metrics and measures that have more to do with science than they do with the human spirit. And part of my work has been looking at the way ritual in different, contexts help aid the moving of like the weight in the chest area, in the stomach area, in the mind, all the things, kind of shift that weight a little bit so that we can witness each other and be with each other even in the pain. And so that no one has to hide that or contort that so that another could feel better about their experience, because we don't need to do that anymore. So this is kind of the beginning, the middle. I don't know what to call it anymore. I'm actually not interested in naming it, and yet I can't help myself as a poet. I started with questions, but what I found in this is that I didn't particularly have questions. I have something to say. And I don't want to quantify or qualify what I have to say by bringing everybody else's thoughts into it, because part of the way that we gaslight each other is that we have to shape things, and so the educational system as well, right? Shape things so that they look a particular way, so that they make sense and are qualified and quantified by some sort of external data to prove that it either exists or doesn't exist, or where is it at. And I don't want to be a part of that. And so while I've tried to write and I've tried to create and like all these different ways of moving with this particular topic, it's my own resistance to both my conditioning that demands that I write the longest ass paper possible or create the multi-layered like experience. And frankly, in my own personal experience, my capacity in these days has been really challenging, as with many others, and all that's going on. So I will continue to write poems to the other pieces as well. And I hope that you've enjoyed this visual that's both challenging, but also to me full of beauty, because I believe us to have the capacity to hold for the pain, to hold for the things that go unresolved or seem unfixable. We live in a world like that. We live in a world that has challenges. We live in an ecosystem that constantly has to shift and innovate, and that things are going through cycles of death and rebirth. And I don't want to just get to the places of rebirth. I want to honor and hold sacred space for the places of death and for the places of mourning. So many people are having experiences in their body, psychosomatic experiences, and also very literal chemical experiences, because grief has not been given a container. And I don't mean that as an external thing. I really mean that as, what are the rituals that come from our communities that help us hold space for that don't require minimizing, diminishing, or trying to move too fast so that we don't have to feel the amount of despair that one can feel. So this is my partial, if you will, offering toward that end of beginning a different way of building our capacity to hold. I didn't want it to be specific to Jewish practice, because for me in this society that we live in, it's become trendy to appropriate. And I'm not interested in anybody appropriating my community's practices, whether that's Jewish, whether it's Taino, whether it's African and Yoruban traditions. I'm not interested in replicating that in that way. When I come into space, I bring it with me, all of it. And also I honor and have boundaries around it. So I'm not offering up rituals in terms of specific Jewish rituals or Yoruban rituals or Taino rituals, because those belong to my communities. What I am offering up is the idea that we can tap into indigenous ways that allow us to witness each other in pain. And I think of drum circles. I think of the way we would dance and the way we do dance when things are going on. I think of the way in my Jewish tradition that we have space for like bringing in mourners to cry. You know, you can pay mourners to come, folks who will come and cry in ways that you can't even wail because you're having the experience. And so for me, like all these different practices are powerful beyond measure in terms of holding container. And also my invitation is that folks would find practices that are aligned with them and in some way aligned with their lineage, because to me that is really, really powerful, and can be if you will, a catalyst to learning how to be with each other in those ways. So that is my complete thought or like genesis, if you will, of talking about resilience being a colonial construct. It's another way to try to control equally how we live and how we be in community with each other. And that's just not cool anymore. So that's it. That is my sharing for now. And I hope to offer up more soon. I also want to say that you'll notice in the video there is, flight, fight, fawn, and freeze. Those are trauma responses. And the reason I put them in there, again, because they've been so normalized and the way that they look so normalized that people don't realize that they're having actually traumatic responses or reactions. And even if they make it look good. And I think about a lot of folks who I know, more specifically men of color, that have their own businesses and are all about like the grind and the hustle. And these are personal conversations that I've had. And they're all about that. And what they don't realize, like, they're fighting every single day to take care of their families, to not, settle for the status quo, to not be a typical fill in the blank, all the things. But what they don't see is that the ways that they're going about it have a direct relationship with trauma responses. And because they make it look good, there's no need to stop and examine it, because this is what we have to do in order to survive. So that is it. That is my complete right now moment. So thank you so much for watching this and listening.